Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Sernick from State Advisors. I'm here to discuss with you today the new Corona relief package that was passed today by the United States Congress. Of the $900 billion package that was passed today, $286 billion was set aside for direct economic relief for workers and families. Of that, $120 billion was set aside for unemployment insurance and $166 billion in economic impact payments. It includes $300 per week for unemployed individuals. It extends it for an additional 3 months. In addition, $600 for individuals making up to $75,000, $1,200 for families making up to $150,000, and $600 for each dependent child. In addition, there was $325 billion set aside for small businesses. Of that includes $284 billion for first and second forgivable PPP loans, a dedicated set aside for very small businesses, and lending through community-based lenders like community development institutions and minority deposited institutions across the country. It also expands PPP loan eligibility to certain 501c6 nonprofits. $20 billion was set aside for new EIDL grants for businesses in low-income communities, $3.5 billion for SBA enhanced debt relief programs, and $2 billion for SBA lending enhancements across the board. In addition, there was $15 billion set aside dedicated funding for live venues, independent movie theaters, and cultural institutions, which were not included in previous packages. The good news is for restaurant and hospitality industries in particular, there's a larger reward allowable for the PPP loans, where it's enhanced from 2.5 times your payroll to 3.5 times your payroll. The PPP expenses and costs associated with outdoor dining, supplier costs, are now eligible and forgivable across the board. In addition, one of the major changes to the new legislation is that prior PPP loan forgiveness was not going to be allowable in terms of tax deductibility. In other words, the costs associated with paying payroll were not going to be allowed to be deductible. This bill clarifies a prior Treasury regulation to allow for the deductibility of payroll expenses, even if the PPP loan is forgivable. In addition, there's $12 billion set aside for community capital investment programs in minority depository institutions. There's $45 billion that's for the transportation industry, $15 billion for payroll, $1 billion for airline contractor payrolls, $14 billion for transit authorities, $10 billion for state highways, $2 billion for airports and airport concessionaires, $2 billion for private motor coach companies, and $1 billion for Amtrak set aside. In addition, there's $69 billion that's set aside for the healthcare industry. $20 billion will go towards funding vaccine procurement and distribution, $9 billion to the CDC and states for vaccine distribution, and $3 billion is set aside for a national stockpile. In addition, there's $22 billion all sent directly to states for testing, tracing, and COVID mitigation programs. The bill will also include $82 billion for schools to provide a variety of reliefs that the governors of each state will be allowed to distribute to the variety of school programs and school districts across the country. There'll be $26 billion set aside for nutrition and agriculture, of which $13 billion of that will be direct payments to farmers for payments, purchases, and loans which they may have suffered to help offset suffering costs that they may have had during the pandemic. In addition, the last two things that I want to mention is that it repeals the requirement of deducting any EIDL advance that may have been received from the PPP forgiveness amount. In other words, if you had an EIDL loan and a PPP loan, you will no longer need to deduct the EIDL loan from the amount of the PPP for deductibility purposes. In addition, the Congress has substantially simplified the forgiveness process for loans of $150,000 or less for the PPP loan process. Stay tuned for more information as it develops.